All right, welcome back to our church history class. We're on to chapter 11, and we're looking today at the church and the Enlightenment. And it's kind of the next step, obviously, as we move forward through our history. And so today what we want to talk about, when we think about the Enlightenment, we kind of think about that time where we really begin to enter into the scientific revolution and that rapid explosion of scientific discovery and so forth. And so I think a really important question that I want us to keep thinking about, that we're going to keep thinking about throughout this chapter in a specific way, is the relationship between what we might call faith or our Catholicism, if you will, our faith and our reason. Reason there, when we hear the word reason, we think about science, right? When we talk about reason, we think about the things that we can know, the things that we can observe, the things that we can see, using our mind. And so we want to talk about the relationship between those two. We want to talk about the relationship between faith and this idea of science and what I can know. And I think the question I want us to keep asking, we're going to keep coming back to throughout this chapter, is, are those two things at war with each other? Is Catholicism, is the Catholic faith at war with science, with reason, with intelligence, right? That's how it's often portrayed. And it's really important that we look at that, right? And keep that question in mind. It's as I'm going to show in a minute, it's the number one reason young adults leave the Catholic faith is because they think that it is opposite or somehow fighting with or competing against science, right? With intelligence, right? Vatican I want to start with this quote that the First Vatican Council said. Again, this is in the 1800s, okay? There can never be any real discrepancy between faith and science, faith and reason. Since the same God who reveals mysteries and infuses faith has bestowed the light of reason on the human mind, God cannot deny himself, nor can truth ever contradict truth. What they're saying is, God made everything. God gave us a brain. God gave us a mind. God gave us the ability to think things. And so if God gives us these things, then God's not going to give us a mind and an ability to do things and to do science and to think through things and to use our reason and our intellect, right? He's not going to give us this mind and then have that contradict everything else that's happened before that in our faith, right? And so that's what Vatican I is saying. Look, God gives us everything, including our minds, to use them. The idea that we're going to find with our mind something that's going to contradict what the other things that God has given to us is crazy. That's not God. Truth can never contradict truth, right? And so we're not going to find something in science that's going to prove, no, actually, it is good to murder people. Right? We're not going to find something in science that's going to say, you know what, it actually is good, to whatever, do something crazy, to have an affair or whatever, right? We're not going to find anything in science that's going to contradict our faith, right? And so that's really important. Again, I just want to keep this question is really super important, and I hope that you're following along and paying attention, and I hope that this is helpful for you because you get this stuff all the time. I know you get it in high school. You're going to get it in college. That's how it's portrayed, that faith and science, Catholicism and science are at war with each other, and it's just garbage. There's nothing further from the truth. It makes for, when you say this, when you start to talk about it in that way, as if, Catholicism is over here, and they're all superstitious, crazy people who just, worship the sky. And then you have really smart scientific people over here, right? I mean, it's just such a cartoon version of what was actually going on in the scientific revolution, right? Nothing could be further from the truth, right? And even the idea that somehow in the 1800s or whenever, you read people that are writing in the 300s, right? St. Augustine. When you read Aristotle, who's writing 300 years before Christ, these people are some of the smartest people that have ever lived, right? It wasn't like everyone woke up and decided to use their brains in the scientific revolution, right? It's just crazy. But again, if we don't know history, That's why this class is so important. If we don't know history, then we're going to buy all of that garbage, right? So I'm trying to inoculate you, right, from that, from buying into all of that stuff. Okay, so we're going to move through some stuff. This is super important. I send this out to the parents every year when we're talking about, parents at religious ed classes and stuff. There's a list. You can find it online. Type in Catholic cleric scientists, basically priest scientists. You're going to find a list of 400 Catholic priests and clerics, deacons, bishops, who were pivotal players in the scientific revolution. And then, if you Google lay Catholic scientists from the scientific revolution, you're going to get an even bigger list. Hundreds of the key people in the very scientific revolution itself were Catholic, right? Were priests. The guy that, as we've said before, the guy that came up with the Big Bang Theory is a Catholic priest. Other scientists throughout the scientific revolution, Copernicus, Gregor Mendel, the guy that came up with genetics, the idea of DNA and all that kind of stuff that we're still exploring and is just like the cutting edge of science now. Catholic, right? Catholic cleric. Roger Bacon, Nicolas Steno, Leonardo da Vinci, Galileo, we'll talk about him in a minute, René Descartes, Blaise Pascal, Louis Pasteur, Doppler, the guy that, the Doppler radar, okay, Catholic. Ampere, the guy that, had so much important work to do with electricity. This is just a sampling, right? These are the pivotal players of the scientific revolution, and they're all Catholics, and a lot of them are priests or clerics, right? It's awesome. We need to be celebrating that and remembering that and talking about that instead of acting like there's two camps, Catholic camp and then, who are all morons and just, believe in superstition, and then all the smart people, right? We got to fight that. Okay. Another thing is the church also, not only are the vast majority of scientists that are around in the scientific revolution Catholic, not only that, the church also lays the groundwork for this scientific explosion by how? What we've talked about in previous classes. By coming up with the university system, right? The Catholic Church comes up with the idea of the university and begins and founds almost all of the initial universities that are there that pop up in Europe. It's a Catholic idea, right? It's a Catholic idea. And so it's super important. So how could you, as Catholics, how could you come up with a university system that allows for this vast explosion of intelligence? How could you, as the Catholic Church, have all of these wonderful people that have all of these amazing scientific discoveries, but we're the ones that hate science? That's what people say today, right? It's crazy, absolutely crazy. It makes me furious, but I'm excited to be teaching you about this today because this is super important. Now, this is one of the reasons, right? One of the reasons that we definitely have to dive into briefly that people say that the church hates science is the Galileo controversy, okay? Now, just the brief summary. There's amazing books on it. It's a fascinating story, fascinating chapter of history. You need to, once you go in and if you read a chapter on it in any history book that's true and fair, you're going to get what you thought happened in Galileo is not what happens, okay? Galileo controversy. Basically this, up through the 1400s or so, everyone accepted the theory put forward by Ptolemy. Okay, so we call it the Ptolemaic view of the heavens. We call that geocentrism, which his idea was that the earth is at the center of everything, right? Everything spins around and revolves around the earth. And we see this, you can find lines in Scripture where people say, well, that's true, because when you read a line like this in Ecclesiastes, the sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. People are reading that. They don't have the advantages that we have of technology and the scientific revolution and telescopes and satellites and all that other stuff, right? So you read that and you start to think that's actually what's, that imagine yourself in the 1200s and you have Scripture taught and you see it every morning. You see the sunrise, you see the sunset, You don't feel yourself spinning around anywhere. You think that maybe, okay, and then now we see it in Scripture. Okay, so maybe what it is the earth is the actual center of the universe. But the Scripture doesn't say anywhere that the earth is the center of the universe. It's making, I mean, we still say this language, even though we know that the earth isn't the center of the universe, you still say the sun rises, right? No one smites you for that. No one says, oh, that's so wrong. No, the sun doesn't rise. We spin around on our axis at a certain angle, and we're rotating around the sun, and it's the earth that's rotating. No one gets mad. I mean, like, so we still use this language, right? So we can say that we recognize as Catholics that it doesn't contradict Scripture, right, to say that. But some people early on had struggles with getting over or trying to comprehend that, and they fell back to Scripture and said, no, Scripture says that we are the center of the universe because it says the sun rises. It's really kind of stupid. I mean, the whole argument is really just kind of like, how can you really... But it is what it is. Okay. Anyways, so in 1543, Nicholas Copernicus comes along, Catholic. Nicholas Copernicus comes along and writes the book On the Revolutions of Heavenly Bodies, and he talks about all the planets rotating around the sun, right? And it's based on some different scientific astronomical observations, right, that he makes. So Galileo comes along and proposes what we call heliocentrism, the belief that the sun is the center of the universe, right? Kind of along the lines of the Copernican, kind of taking some of the work that he did as well, right? So Galileo proposes this heliocentrism, that the sun is at the center of the universe as well. Now, he has this famous line that's super important, right? He says this, and we believe this as Catholics too. Galileo is Catholic, we still believe this. The Bible doesn't teach us how the heavens go, but how to go to heaven, right? It's a great line. It's kind of funny, right? The Bible doesn't teach us how the stars move in an exact scientific way. It's a poem. It's a poem. The sun rises and the sun goes down. We still say it. You and I still say it. When does the sun rise? Okay? But the Bible doesn't give us the science. Okay, we understand that parts of the Bible are written poetically and are not meant to convey a scientific fact. And so, Galileo is absolutely right. The Bible isn't there to teach us how the heavens go, what's at the center, whether it's the earth or the sun at the center of the universe or any of those kinds of things. The Bible isn't there to teach us science, right? It's there to teach us how to go to heaven. And so that's just a kind of a nice play on words. The Bible doesn't teach us how the heavens go, but how to go to heaven. Okay. Now, Galileo, it's important to know, Galileo was embraced by the Pope. They were actually somewhat friendly, and other scientists and other people in the church. Okay? But here's the problem, right? Galileo and the Pope were kind of combative towards each other, right? There was a lot of pride involved. Galileo was kind of antagonistic. The Pope was kind of antagonistic as well, back, and there's this back and forth kind of tension that comes a lot of times in human relationships. That's unfortunate. Maybe it's with your brother and sister, or a parent, or your parents, or it's just one of those. There's friction there. Pride gets involved. You say things you don't mean to say. All that kind of stuff. Okay. Galileo kind of wants his science accepted right away. He doesn't want to wait for anybody else to kind of look over it. He's like, I know I'm right. This is the right thing. And he demanded that his theory be accepted right away. Now, what's interesting to say here is that Galileo's theory, in one sense, people don't talk about this very often, but Galileo's theory wasn't right. Right? It wasn't totally right. It was better than the Ptolemaic view, right? But we now know, after Galileo, as we continue to unfold and unpack science, the beauty of what would come in the Big Bang Theory and the science behind that from Father Lamartine, okay? I think I'm saying that right. With the Big Bang Theory, what we would discover eventually is that the sun's not at the center of the universe either, which is what Galileo was saying. Right? So the irony is many people talk about Galileo as if he figured it all out. He didn't figure it all out because he was saying that the sun's at the center of the universe, which it's not either. Right? So, I mean, one of the things, I don't say that to disparage Galileo as much as just to say that Galileo was like, I want everybody to accept this right away. And the church and the other scientists are like, no, let's work at this. Let's collaborate this. Let's verify this research, right? Before we kind of go ahead and say, hey, we've got something big here. And he was kind of, proud of his discovery and wanted it accepted right away, which again is somewhat ironic because now we know it's wrong. Okay, but again, way better, good science, great scientist, Catholic scientist, doing it for the right reasons. But again, a little bit of pride pulled in there to the Galileo controversy. Okay, he's placed under house arrest, and which again, not the right way to handle that by the Pope, of course, right? The Pope the Church eventually apologized for placing him under house arrest. By every account, the house arrest, he was living completely comfortably and taken care of and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't like he was locked in jail. I thought, when I was a teenager, for some reason, I went to Catholic schools, I was under the impression that Galileo had been tortured and killed by the church, right? That's how crazy it is out there. That's how crazy people talk about this. He was put under house arrest, right? And the church later apologizes for that. And but anyways, again, it's wrong. It wasn't the right way to handle that. But okay, that's essentially the Galileo controversy, right? Now, major question for those who would say that the Galileo affair proves that the church hates science. This is a really, really important thing. You can remember this when you're in a high school class a year from now or next month or whatever. Everyone's, oh, you're a Catholic, the church hates science, right? This is a great point. I heard this, I can't remember where I heard it. I would give them credit if I could remember. But ask the person that says, see, Galileo proves that the church hates science. Ask that person to name one other scientist that the church has, quote unquote, persecuted. Like people are saying that Galileo was persecuted. Okay, if the church hates science and it persecuted Galileo, then name me one other scientist that the church has persecuted in its 2,000-year history. And no one will ever be able to say a name, right? This Galileo thing is like, it's like he's this big, huge martyr, and it's just the brave scientist fighting, this evil, corrupt, mean. It was two guys that knew each other, had respect for each other, but were proud and stubborn and fought each other. And it wasn't perfect, of course, but the idea that was science versus church is just crazy. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. And the fact is that this is one of the number one reasons young people leave the church. And it just breaks your heart because it's not even true. It's not even worth leaving over. Okay. Another thing that comes up in the scientific revolution, okay? The theory of evolution, right? Of course, with Charles Darwin. But this really, important to say here, some Christians, we've talked about this if you were with us when we were doing our scripture class, maybe it was a year ago or 2 years ago. Some Christians interpret the Bible literally, right? I mean, like, to the world was literally created in 6 days, right? Now, the Catholic Church does not interpret the Bible literally in every passage. The Catholic Church is fine with saying that the 6 days of creation is more of a poetic thing, right? It doesn't have to be literal for the Bible to still be true. So Charles Darwin writes this On the Origin of Species, one of the most famous works, of humanity, really, in many ways. The church has no problem with saying that God didn't literally make everything in 6 literal days. So there very easily could have been an evolutionary process that takes place. So there could have been this, God kind of creates the world and animals and creatures kind of evolve and come along, and even what would become a human person, right? We're fine with saying that there was some evolution involved in that. That's a huge problem for if you believe the Bible literally. Darwin presents a big problem, but for Catholics, he doesn't, right? Again, the church says truth cannot contradict truth. If something was presumed to mean something in Scripture is shown to mean something else through science, that's not a problem for Catholics. So if there's something in there that looks like it's true, the sun rises, but then science shows us, that the sun doesn't actually rise, we're fine with going back and realizing, hey, that's a poetic thing, right? It was, okay, we now know through science that what we maybe were tempted to think was literal, we now know it's not literal, right? We have no problem as Catholics with that. If we find proof and there's science establishing and looking like, hey, there might have been some evolutionary development of some of these creatures, and maybe the creation story didn't take place in 6 literal days, no, that's fine as Catholics. We're like, that's great. Science helps us learn more about it. Maybe if we were tempted to think that it was a 6-day thing, but now maybe we have some proof or some evidence that there was some development and it wasn't 6 actual days, fine. There's nothing, that doesn't cause any Catholic any problem at all, right? What we do believe, though, and this is important, some people take Darwin's research and will kind of use it to establish this really important point. I don't think Darwin was necessarily motivated by this, but we believe as Catholics that even if there was some kind of evolutionary development, which of course it looks like scientifically that there is some of that going on, we still believe that humanity was created by God in a special way. And so that even if there was, at some point, God comes down and takes some of the development of apes or whatever, okay, I'm speaking very, very vaguely here, right? But God takes the apes that have kind of evolved, but at some point, God comes in and intervenes and makes humanity. And he makes humanity in his image and likeness, unlike all the other things that are out there, unlike the trees, the rocks, the mountains, all the other things, the worms, the apes, the whatever, the elephants, whatever the creatures are, God intervenes at some point and creates humanity, and that humanity is made in God's image and likeness, different from all other creatures. So we don't believe we just stumbled into our humanity with our intellect and our intelligence and our will and all of these things that we have within us. We do not believe that those were possible to have evolved into them. Right? People all the time will be like, oh, look, this ape, draws with crayons, or, this ape can learn sign language, or that, because they want to prove that there's nothing special about humanity, but we know that's not true. We believe with our faith and really with observation as well, the gap between an elephant or an ape coloring in his cage and learning sign language versus filming a class and putting it on YouTube and using a camera and all the crazy things that we have in electricity and all the things that happen in the scientific revolution. The gap between a coloring ape and that is infinite. The church is saying, right? There's no way to explain the evolution from coloring in a cage and learning sign language to what we have as human beings, right? With everything that took place in the scientific revolution and all of the things that we see. Humanity is special, and it's very important for us to know that we believe that as Catholics, and that's really core. So nothing of Darwin's research proves anything along those lines. People have taken his research and tried to use that to sell it to you and say, you're not special, there's nothing special about humanity, we're just like dogs and cats. And there's a story every day in the news, right? There's a story every day, such and such dolphin was heard, squeaking and communicating about this, or such and such dog was, sad because, and it was shown to have tears because of the dog that died, right? These people are trying to establish and prove to you and tell you that you're not special, that there's nothing special about humanity. The church says, no, there is. We are made in God's image and likeness. And we know that by our faith. We know that hopefully as well, parts of that we can hopefully pick up through using our reason and our science to see how big of the gap is between us and the animals. Okay. Again, we've talked about this. The church didn't cause the Dark Ages. It brought us out of them with the universities and this love for knowledge and wisdom that really explodes, along with the help of all of the stuff that comes to us through Aristotle and the Greeks and the Romans, that it was preserved in Constantinople and other places. Okay. Christianity puts forward this idea that the world is knowable out there, right? God, we believe as Catholics, the church puts that idea out there that we can know the world, that we can study the world, that we can learn, that we can have reason. The church fosters this stuff, right? And that it's worth knowing. That's a very Catholic idea, that it is worth studying these things, that it's worth observing, that it's worth being a scientist. Because the world that God made it and it is good. it's good for us to discover these things. Pope Benedict said that science is the adventure that God has left to us, right? To learn about our world around us is an adventure, right? And God has allowed us to have this adventure where we can learn about the world. Problems come in here. This is really important then, finally, as we're kind of wrapping up. There's a problem that starts to creep in when we start to believe, which is what a lot of people believe today in our culture, right? Particularly the ones that have left faith behind, and maybe even a lot of people that are in faith. But we would call this a heresy in a sense. We would call this the heresy of scientism, or we might use the word rationalism, right? Reason. Okay, it is overemphasizing science, in a sense. It is an overemphasis. It is a belief that science is going to get us everything that's true. It believes that only what can be scientifically observed, only what can be scientifically observed is true, right? Now, we believe that that's a terrible idea, and that will destroy you, right? Because that's... There are so many things that you and I believe in, and that the vast majority of the world believes in, that you cannot prove through science, that you cannot observe scientifically. If I say to my mom, after making an amazing Thanksgiving pie, and not just because of the pie, but Mom, I love you. My mom wouldn't say, well, I can't scientifically measure that or observe that, so I don't think that you do love me, right? No, we would say, I recognize that my mom, that my son loves me, and she's not going to challenge me and say, well, I can't scientifically observe it, right? Love is just one example of the things that we don't scientifically observe. You can't observe love. You can see the fruits of love. You can see someone crying. You can see someone, helping a poor person. You can say, oh, that's love. But you can't scientifically observe love, right? And yet we believe that it's real. There's so many things out there that we don't believe that you have to scientifically prove in order for it to be right? Another problem that begins to spring up as an extension of this Enlightenment phase, as you begin to enter into this, as some people start to buy this heresy of rationalism or science only, people begin to believe that science is going to cure all of the problems that we have. And there's a lot of people that believe that today. Oh, well, gosh, technology is just going to solve every problem that we have. And, if you throw out there a problem that's in our world today, people literally believe that science is going to fix it. Well, yes, we currently have wars going on, but once science gets smart enough, we won't have wars anymore, right? That's crazy, right? There's no way that's not something that science isn't going to solve those problems, right? We've had wars. We've had way more violent wars. We've had way more people die by the hundreds of millions as science has gotten more sophisticated, right? So the idea that science is going to cure all problems is crazy, right? Another problem with this, with just focusing and just saying, I only believe in science, is that in that case, I can do science however I want, right? We as Catholics believe that science needs to be done in harmony with faith, in harmony with God, in respect of God. I don't just go in and destroy embryos because I believe that's a human person, right? I don't just go in and say, you know what, I want to find out if this scientific experiment will work, if it might cure cancer, so I'm going to kill my neighbor trying it, right? Well, we would say, no, that's not good. That contradicts, God, the truth of things, right? So we believe, but there are a lot of people out there who say science, if it's only science, if science is all that matters, then you can start to do science however you want. You can kill people, you can torture people, or you can torture animals, whatever. You can do all of this crazy stuff, right? You can do whatever you want. Once science breaks away from faith, then what happens is science begins to be a perverted version, a sick version of itself, where you begin to do all these kinds of crazy things and anything is okay, right? People are, we always are going to have boundaries. No, we're not, And so we got to get away. We have to have our science being done in relationship with what we know also to be good and true and right and fair and just and all those kinds of things. Another problem even with that approach is it starts to strip the world of mystery, and this is just more of of a kind of a Catholic complaint against that, as opposed to saying, that it. But anyway, it strips the world of its mystery. There's this deism that becomes popular is a phrase, deism meaning God. So this idea begins to be popular among Masons and Benjamin Franklin, and I mean just a lot of this is very popular around this time that the American colonies are being founded and all that kind of stuff. And it's this idea that God kind of sets the world in motion, and the clock kind of thing. He kind of winds the clock and he sets it in motion, and then he just gets out of the way, right? And he just leaves us alone. And he's like, you guys figure it out, do whatever you want, right? So but again, this all has its roots in just saying that just science is all that matters. Okay. I want to just introduce really quickly, it's going to be way more important next chapter, but two guys that come up here towards the end of the Enlightenment period and kind of bring us into the French Revolution. Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Voltaire. These are two really important figures who are French Enlightenment figures, and they're going to play a major role in the French Revolution, which I believe is one of the most important things that has happened in church history, and we're going to get to that next week, right? That'll come up to us next week. But these guys really lay the foundation for this French Revolution, and they kind of take this rationalism to an extreme, and we're going to see the problems that causes starting next week, okay? But again, there begins to be a despising of religion by some people because it begins to be this just science, that's all that matters, and so we hate religion, we hate faith, because faith is somehow trying to tell us what we can and can't do, right? And so two of the people who we would say, I think, fall into that category would be Voltaire, who said that Christianity is an absurd religion and a human invention created to control people. We really start to see out of the Enlightenment, as some people start to focus just on science and say that's all it is, there begins to be a hatred for faith. There begins, particularly the Catholic Church, right? There begins to be this hatred for it. It's being seen as oppressive. It's being seen as trying to control people. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, said that essentially he comes up with this idea of a social contract, which this would, in many ways, helps clear the ground in a good way for our Constitution, and that's probably a whole nother discussion that we need to have some other time. We don't really have time to do that as much as I'd like. But it's a fascinating discussion. But Rousseau said that basically we enter into the social contract because any compulsion to obey authority is contrary to our nature. We're made free, he said. We're meant to be free from every burden, every encumbrance. We're made to be free from God, etc. And so he said we enter into this contract as a society and we limit ourselves. We agree, let's have laws, let's have rules, let's have a constitution so that we can keep safe from each other, right? The social contract, the constitution, the laws, they begin to see them as things that are meant to just keep people under control and keep people from breaking and doing things that are highly immoral or violent, etc. This just flies in the face of everything we believe as Catholics. We believe that we are not made to be free from God, that by living in God we find freedom, right? And it's the total opposite, right? Rousseau is saying that we are meant to be free and we're not going to be free until we're free of God, when Catholics are saying you will not find freedom until you live your life in God. It's complete backwards of Rousseau, right? We also believe that society isn't just something that we enter into to protect ourselves from each other, right? We believe that society is something good, and God's laws are good, and the laws of the state, if they're in conformity with the laws of God, those are good. Those help us flourish, not just keep us safe from each other, right? They're enriching for us, and it's not just some kind of necessity that we enter into. Okay, so I just wanted to talk to you just briefly about Voltaire and Rousseau. Your book has them in this chapter, and they're going to be key figures that'll lead into the French Revolution next chapter. All right, a couple of questions. Number one, list 3 famous Catholic scientists from the scientific revolution. Number 2, if someone said to you, Galileo proves that the Catholic Church hates science, how would you respond? Number 3, if someone said, what do Catholics believe about evolution, what would you say to them? And then number 4, what is wrong with the scientism or rationalism heresy? And number 5, tell me a little bit about who Voltaire and Rousseau were in a sentence. All right, who were they in a sentence? So I have some of these questions, a little bit longer of an answer, but I think it's good for you to kind of formulate in your own mind, in your own words, how might you answer these questions that you're going to get put to you in your classes in high school, your classes in college, and so many of your friends are leaving Christianity for in general. I think it's good to put answers to that. So just kind of flesh those out a little bit. How might you respond in a sentence or two to each of those statements, okay? Please let me know if I can ever do anything for you, help in any way, and know of my prayers for you, and I look forward to being with you again next week. Take care, and God bless.